Welcome to the Pearls of Wisdom from the Cauldron. My name is Lisa Stewart, and in this episode, I'd like to talk to you about your altar and how to set one up. First of all, I'd like to talk about the actual altar itself. Many people are lucky enough to have a piece of furniture that they can designate as their altar. Perhaps it's an old dresser or a nightstand or even a small table that they could refinish or repurpose to be their altar. If you have that option, that's wonderful. You don't even really need an altar cloth. But if you're using a piece of furniture that gets used for other things when you're not using it as your altar, an altar cloth might be a little more important to kind of draw the proper energy to the sacred space or to that altar. Here at the shop, we have done some repurposing and made some really beautiful little altars out of old furniture that's been upcycled. Some even have little drawers to put all of your tools away. That said, here at the shop, the Church of the Eternal Circle, we have several different altar cloths. Some that we use for different Sabbats, some that have the zodiac energies of the different full or new moon aspects, and others that are just the colors of the elements. The next thing I'd like to talk about are some of the things that are on your altar and what they represent or why they're there. There'll certainly be another video that will be a class on the tools of the craft of the wise, such as a broom or sword, or some of the things that we don't go in depth about today. But what I'd like to talk about today is really how to set up your altar and why you would have the different things that we have here. One of the, I think, most easily confused things about the altar are the things that we would use for the quarters or the four directions. Really, there are three different things going on for those directions. There is a light for the watchtower of that direction. In the east, we would use a yellow candle to call the energy or open that astral doorway, that watchtower, and call the guardian of that watchtower or direction. Next, we want something on the altar that represents the element of air. So we have a bell. And this bell represents the element of air. Then we have a fairy or a sylph. And this is where we would call the elemental forward and have a place to host that elemental. So we have several items here that are all working with that east energy or the energy of air. We have a light for the watchtower, we have an energy of the element, and we have the elemental. When we move to fire, we have the same sort of idea. We have a fire candle to light the way for those guardians to come through that gateway. We have an elemental being, a beautiful little salamander dragon, to host the elemental of fire. And we have an incense censer with a really hot charcoal inside, and that's the element of fire. The same goes for the other side of the altar, the feminine side of the altar. We have an undine to house the elemental. We have a cauldron with water to represent the element of water. And of course, again, we have a blue candle to represent the water watchtower for that gateway to open. In the north, we have a green candle to open that gateway, call that guardian. We have Mrs. Gnome, and she houses the elementals of earth. And then, of course, we have a crystal ball. This one happens to be garnet. That would hold the element of earth. Many of the tools, in fact most all of the tools, are governed by an element. For instance, the pentacle is earth, the athame, fire, the wand, air, the chalice, water. But we'll get into that when we talk more about the tools. Today is really about the altar setup. Now, we like to bring people in with the 4 elements as well. So some people would use smudge and feathers to represent air and fire. Here what we've done is made a blend of incense to represent our group or the energy that we're working with. This one happens to be for the Capricorn full moon. So we've chosen resins and herbs and oils ruled by Saturn, the planetary ruler of Capricorn. And that would be what we would use to smudge people into the sacred space. Then we have salt and water, and we would make a holy water by mixing those two together and asperge everyone around the circle before the circle started. We certainly would be inviting our deities, Cerridwen and Cernunnos or Gwyn Ap Nudd, and we have some place for them to reside or be called to, and of course we're using lights to light their way. So maybe you don't have all of these items, and that's certainly all right. You can cast a circle or set up an altar with very minimal items. I would suggest the best thing to do would be to have the 4 candles to light the way for the guardians of the watchtower, and then you could use other things on your altar to be inviting to the elementals. Let me say though that fairies don't really like bells, so you would think more about a fan or something ruled by air if you didn't have an elemental being for them to reside in. Again, as far as fire goes, they could reside in the candle. You don't really need a second item for fire. Certainly a cauldron or even a glass bowl of water would work for the West. And I'm sure if you're into Wicca, you like sparkly things, and you must have some sort of crystal that you could put out in the North. So that's pretty much the items that we would use on our altar. Again, to find out more in depth about what each item holds or represents, you might want to look for our Wicca 101 class. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and recently someone asked me on my little Facebook page, Ask a Witch Mother, what about a book of shadows? How do I start a book of shadows? So I have one here that's handmade for the store. A lot of really wonderful energy was put into making this. But I think what you really need to do first before you write up a book of shadows is figure out what your tradition is. Here at the Church of the Eternal Circle, the Awareness Shop, we follow a Celtic Wiccan tradition that I guess, for lack of a better explanation, would be called the Stewart tradition. And we've worked a long time to really understand and experience and figure out what works for us. So this presentation is certainly not from an eclectic point of view. This episode of Pearls is based on our tradition that we follow. We have specific colors that represent the energies to us. And we certainly give the wand the element of air and the athame the element of fire. So if you do have any questions, you can certainly find Ask a Witch Mother page on Facebook and ask away, or look for a Wicca 101 that'll explain more in depth all the energies and how to use all of the magical tools. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. My name is Lisa Stewart. Blessed be.